Hi everyone, I'm Catharine Clark. This is my gallery in case you weren't sure. And actually tonight, I'm in the role as founding director of BOXBLUR, which is a performance initiative that we began in 2016 and that is fiscally supported by Dance Film SF. And Randall's here somewhere from Dance Film SF. There you are. Hi. So the mission of BOXBLUR is to encourage dialogue between visual and performing art practices, including readings like this one. In the 7 years that we've been producing BOXBLUR events, we've worked with more than 50 nonprofit organizations, at least as many artists and performers, and have had the rare opportunity to produce Shimon Addy's Night Watch on the San Francisco Bay and Oakland Estuary during the pandemic in 2021. We're delighted to be working with Small Press Traffic for this afternoon's event. Amy Trachtenberg's powerful and poetic exhibition, The Violet June of Autumn, is in our viewing room. I hope everybody got a chance to see it. And she also has a beautiful visual poem, I've been calling it, which is screening in our media room just for tonight, so don't miss it. It'll continue after the readings. She curated tonight's readings. It's been a total joy to work with Amy. I particularly value her multi-dimensional approach to being a creative. And Sid, how do you say your last name? Saidi is the executive director of Small Press Traffic, and will introduce the authors and tell you more about what you are going to hear this evening, or this afternoon actually. So thank you very much for partnering with us and for encouraging us to do this. I really appreciate it. I hope you've all had a chance to taste the drink. Gillian, thank you, amazing. Really appreciate it. It's a violet cocktail. I'm sure it was a challenge to figure that out, so thank you. And thank you, audience, for being here, and the writers, and it's nice to welcome some of you back. Vincent, thank you. And also thank you to my team, Catharine Clark Gallery team, and the BOXBLUR team, all of whom are here and helped to make this event what it is.
Thank you so much. Pretty much. I want to thank, of course, Catharine and the gallery team, and my team. My name is Sid Steiny, like Catharine said, director of Small Press Traffic. We are a poetry organization based in San Francisco since 1974. We turned 50 in a year, still around. And we offer events around the Bay Area, poetry-centered organization, but we also work with artists that work in other forms. We also have a new publishing arm. Our website, newly designed website, includes the back room, which is led by Claudia LaRocco, former editorial director of SF Mona's Open Space. We're very lucky to have her on our team now, and there are a few pieces already up, and that will continue to. There'll be new pieces every 2 weeks in the fall and spring. Critical and creative art writing. So take a look. So this event, Amy and I started talking in August, I believe. She approached me, and I could tell she had a vision for what she wanted here to accompany the gorgeous exhibition. I'm sure you've had a chance to look. And as I watched the program take shape in her mind, I love how it's kind of unfolded. Really looking forward to it. I think you'll find that each of the presenters will bring their own distinct voice to the program, and that also there's a kind of shared sensibility among them, and it's a sensibility that's also shared by Amy, and that's embodied by Amy in her work and in her practice. That art making is a part of interwoven in one's life and one's work, and that relationality and community and friendship is an incredibly important part of that, and is an undercurrent in the work that gets made. So I think you'll find that in what we'll see, and also hear everyone's own unique what they bring to it. I think that's good. The order of the event is on our programs, so we'll start with Yedda, and then we'll have Anton, then Vincent, and then Cliff. And like Catharine said, if you haven't had a chance to see Amy's piece in the media room, take a look after the program. And then I look forward to trying out that cocktail myself. Thank you very much. Amy's going to come up now and talk a bit about that.
I think
Thank you,
also
Amy.
we've had some new people arrive, so if there's seats, if you want to come. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Sid. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm just really thrilled to gather all of you and some of the writers that I really admire, who I thought would make a very interesting collage tonight with their various backgrounds and the strengths that they come here with as performers, as designers, as gallerists, as stylists, as poets, as critics. So please enjoy. My reading is really a visual reading of things that I've collected as if in a notebook. And I'm showing a certain amount of minutes of slides, photographs that I've taken over the 3 decades or 4 decades. And it's just a small selection that relates to the kind of impetus for the work that I do. And they're sequenced like phrases. And I don't think it's that dissimilar to the way a lot of writers sort of take notes and build towards a larger story. So thank you, Anton, Katie, Sid, Claudia, everybody at Catharine Clark, and all of you for coming. Enjoy.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks for asking me to participate. The first piece that Amy asked me to read is actually a poem by Leonora Carrington, who couldn't be here tonight, I believe. And the poem is called Estar, for Helio Boitesica. I don't know if people are familiar with the Brazilian artist, but he's definitely worth checking out if you're not. They wore stripes of fire along their limbs for that death dance. Fabric striped like roof tiles, a cabin in Eden, small stars in the shape of proverbs. Checks and balances, her thoughts, myself. Organdy or tulle, crumbled and bunched around a rolled core of burlap, upon a reflective, cylindrical, horizontal base. The shorn-wrapped woman opens the glass olive, rose pigment, floral pattern on the one hand, cape on the other, overlay. He wanted to emphasize the other box, too, in order to do this. He needed Milton. His friend had died in the sea. He needed to celebrate the bandit Lycidas, the top of the box held between 2 hands, diagonal slash, a lighter gray, across the lid. The open box above, small abstractions, piled inside, another, lighter, smaller object to the right and on the following page. Space, relief underneath, the slanted, opaque, illusionary planes on metal stands, on glass. 2 round objects seen from the side, urn-like from above, sphincter-like, pebbled. At least 4 kinds of cloth, from white to dark, a striped one with a sheen to it, held smiling above the gravel, and the shadowed grass of Eden. There's an interesting kind of introductory, very short film that the tape put together that kind of gives a brief introduction to his life and work, which is definitely worth taking a look at if you're not familiar with it. Can I get some more? Thank you. Can you guys I'm going to read some work in progress. It's sort of a listing or running poem. It starts at 1 and counts backwards 59, 58, 57 down to 0. Thank you so much. It's sort of a meditation on the state of being after, and the what we are after is the X of the poem, which I hope will be clear in the reading. And numerous people actually in this room contributed language to the poem, so you may hear echoes of yourself in here. 59, and I'm going to skip around so it won't be so much. Sorry. 1. I walked to the fire. I walked to the fire. I walked to the fire and blow again with my mouth, but the fire is gone. And paintings, shabby from the walls on which they hang, paint making legible the canvas, are gone. Nearer creeping over the snow playing short and long-eared rabbits, ever art history in vertical columns, digits collapsing, integers, centuries of thinking, mediocrity and excellence, alcoves of dirty light, stacked books and tissue, stillage that maintains a wrist now undetectable, disappointment, plastic wrap, animal minds turning from the object world, an empty cavity, talc and sequins, all gone. Candlesticks, mud cloths, ceramic windbells, glass coffee tables, crab set in lucite, gold lame lobster bibs, finer things are gone. Blue and white porcelain across which figures habitually cross a tiny bridge, fading into a linear mist. And certainly the mist burns off and dissipates, and porcelain against a lip, any lip at all, is gone. All arguments of the body, collapsed veins and edema, asthma, the cough that brings up blood, amputations, consent and legacy, pharmaceutical trials, bile, extortion and gender, ectopic pregnancies of every sort. Romance is gone with its chemical roses, of which there are so many: proverbs, Narcan, the bifurcated tongue, and statistical averages. First North American retrospectives, family reunions, spray tan and the equator, subsistence farming and false equivalencies, mid-career, mood boards, disorders of every sort, gravel, gold leaf and ostrich eggs, alphabetized nonfiction and earnest rose, the great meat basin, 40, 50, 75, and so forth. Gone is the last bigot filling up with spittle every liquid of the body, and so to the mouth and all its consequences, intended and otherwise. By now glaciers are gone, and the tiny red worm living in the ass of the Arctic fish makes its last burrowing voyage, puddles at night, pine tips, and artisanal anything, Section 8 water pitchers and bed linens. Restraints are gone, bumper stickers, and the jerk of the abdomen below the coverlet, linen and polyester goose down, synthetic alternatives. I feel like a heater just came on. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, no, there's no.
Or the sound came on? No.
Probably more air.
Okay, well, yeah, that's what I meant. Polyamory is gone, pet food, raw and otherwise, jumper cables, hot tubs, board games, day to evening, all the basic and complex elements and complexes. So loving in its myriad forms and therefore lovers, misunderstanding lyrics from hall closets, the long dead and the recently, rose and baby pink, flamingo, bubblegum, amaranth, magenta, cerise, coral, plus all the wavering peaches, apricots, melon, new carnation hybrids, papaya whip, and tea rose. So art is gone and protest in every manner of effort, transference, objects gained and lost is gone. Desert cities, static, insulin owls, sticks huddled inside of, rubbing mud on the face to pass as ethnography, relentless. Living, furry bodies embrace or running the embrace for psychic or biological reasons. Oversized plaster wings, guitars and violins, so the classics in music, architecture, archetypes, and the marble that sustains, fingernails, mosquitoes, ash, and foment, all manner of adorable plastics, face-ups in the sea. The insulating tendencies of money, claustrophobia, sword tricks, fire ants, bikini-clad assistants, war and magic. Living closer to death because one is poor, physical and psychic memories of war and war-torn countries, amputees, comfort women, and ineffectual stories of war, capacities for viciousness and duplicity, mementos of war and war songs and war genres and generations of war, fatigues and reenactments, army surplus and the surplus of soldiers, and every commemorative celebration, victory and triumph, all pomp and its circumstance, so nostalgia is gone, and Genesis. The working poor are gone, and those that don't, as I've said, shame, of which there are so many, manners of shame, the fire, forgive me, I repeat myself, is gone. Tiny rocks to hold a candle, blowholes, salt and chemical approximations, palette is gone, all the missing keys, redundancy, elegy, avoidance, magical thinking, darkness and memory, forward and back, the whole, the spine, undersides of rocks and dumpsters, shag carpet, the spiral jetty, toothpicks. The distance between the hairy calf and the vertical front edge of the micro-suede sofa, the Big Bang, lime and glittering mica, beaches at night, FOMO, brass pineapple bookends, graphic novels, tectonic plates and hoarding, the need for weight as is the need for weightlessness, World Bank, fire signs, air and earth, carved teak as a stand-in for culture, the front going forward as the back retreats, crude telepathy of substances, angles, the faces in a face. Gone is a slinking predator, predictive behaviors, normative cognition, the elaborate hen house, retail display strategy, side to side, essential oils, graphic vulnerabilities of the neck, peach fuzz, detachment, hammer strokes, the bludgeoned moon, the nail of the thumb next to the pointer, so legacy, breath given and received, collarbone and sternum, alphabets and eyewash, handkerchiefs thrown out somewhere, where, somewhere is gone, plywood and space heaters, vermilion, taxidermy, velvet, and threadbare. Translucent bank of icicles running the roof line snaps off, scattering borrowed light and heartbeats, outlines made on snow, woodpile, wet tarp and rodents. What is temperature is gone. What is dangerous, how many minutes before the sun is shattered by the ridge. There are no words for how much is gone. The heroics of living and all lives machining across the open field. Igniting while rising, all particles at once, nowhere, ever so hard, ever so hand, the keyboard floating up at the wrist. Ever the surrounding lost languages and charcoal, ever the long vacuum of the mouth, ever contortion, ever naming, ever futility, ever imploding, ever was. So I get up again, shame as I mentioned. Shame is gone, fuzzy thinking, air mattresses and prosthetics, manuals for a better life, branded tote bags, cohesion, illusions, everything I ever wanted, dimples, stunt cars, perfect grammar, rows and rows, reservations of the southwest, northwest, north, everywhere, penetrating the surrounding air, arranging flowers in a vase, food stamps, gutting loss and atoms. Any adding up of any kind, wraps constructed of plastic water bottles in museums to make a point are gone, all points in a continuous line, minimalism and maximalism, too tight shoes and better than nothings. I'd like them both, please, is gone, all manner of fried eggs, poached, hard-boiled, everything hard-boiled is gone, every lament chanted, sung, pounded into chests. Hyperbole is gone, so book reviews and blurbs, outdated author photos, light shining out of a new friend, floral patterns in home furnishings, staring into space until my eyes burn, crustaceans, pettiness, ringtones, colonoscopies, bumbling through business class, inventions like wheels, parenthetical space is gone, flashes of recognition, metatext, what we have or have not, and what others do also, lacking scale. And though there is said to be no end to it, paying thresholds are gone, the equity of sewage, institutional racism, precarity, setting a tone is gone, geodes and prayer vigils, the marketing of ancient grains, Quaker applause, newspapers and magazines, hashtags preceding anything are gone, this was a mistake is gone, chore wheels, macaroons and divination, best intentions, sports sandals, intercoms, dry shampoo, a sale tied to anything, the profit margin of human misery, leveraging, ads, and global reputation economies, only a thin lip on which to stand before diving. A lot of air. Let us not forget is gone. Let us not forget to try again in language ever was trying. Another angle for the wood to light, another angle in simple language for warmth, another angle, and all its obliterating reinforcements, patterns, unfazed, oblivious on a spindle, ever referential, ever pages, decided across snowstorms, shipwrecks, stand-ins for desolation. The emptiest of empty, still making a thin crescent shadow on the screen, is gone and fire. And the things or times that are neither minuscule nor galactic, but are said to be inside us, transference and affect, pie and kinship, mushrooms and bitterness, petty grievances and triggers, of which there are so many, aggrieved as I write this, I surely am, snowed in, awaiting every electric preponderance. Only the mind is peopled, it is gone. The tiniest mouse is gone, and the tiniest eye of the tiniest mouse. And on its tiniest face, ever the tiniest eyelid, the tiniest lashes, and the tiniest light. Catching on the tiniest lash as it flutters involuntarily at the tiniest sound, and the tiniest warmth of that tiniest light on the tiniest lash that flutters involuntarily at the tiniest sound is gone. Without sound, the tiniest sound, ever no rhythm, eyelid, no lash, no mouse, no subsequent ripple, ever so mouse. Thank you.
It's great to see everyone here. You know, most of you know me as the director of the gallery, but I can put on my writer hat today, which is a rare and wonderful privilege. The essay I'm reading from is called "You Are Not Alone." It's an essay that was commissioned in 2019 by Margaret Tedesco and Second Floor Projects. I'm so happy that Margaret is here today. And the San Francisco Arts Commission. That summer, Margaret organized a beautiful show titled Without Within. The very moment Jackie M is here. Speaking of people who we have to work with on that show, Cliff is here. Cliff was one of our, one of the amazing artists in the presentation, and that presentation in part featured artists who were thinking through art, action, and the legacies of HIV and AIDS. So it was sort of a real honor to be in dialogue with their ideas. It's also how I met Amy. Amy, when the essay was published, reached out to me, formed a connection, a bond, and that's come full circle here with our collaboration and our friendship. So thank you, Amy. Thank you for thinking of me. It's one quick performative note. For those of you who have maybe read the essay, it's organized into these sections that are punctuated with song lyrics. Amy's encouraged me to try to sing the song lyrics. I've not warmed up, so I can't promise any great miracles, but I'll do my best. So, You Are Not Alone. March 4th, 2019. I groggily wake up in San Francisco to a headline in the New York Times online that reads, HIV is reported cured in the second patient, a milestone in the global AIDS epidemic. I circle around the sentence a few times, trying to parse the matter-of-fact candor in which the milestone news is delivered, less as a declaration and more as a statement of inevitability. I read on. Initial tests, while hopeful, suggest long-term remission rather than an outright cure, while the treatment itself, a radical bone marrow transplant primarily intended to treat leukemia in the patients observed, is dangerous, with its own set of harmful, even life-threatening side effects. The Times refers to the two men who've been cured as the Berlin patient and the London patient, pseudonyms that evoke romantic associations with the urbane. I keep stumbling whenever I read the London patient's name, my mind drifting to sweeping cinematic melodrama a faux nostalgia for empire, and images of Kristen Scott Thomas trapped in a cave at the end of the desert, waiting for a rescue that never comes. I awakened further in the morning haze, thinking about what would happen if a cure were actually discovered in my lifetime. Would the earth crack in two? Would the proverbial heavens break? Or would the news pass by unobserved, the announcement quickly obscured by a pop-up for a 2-for-1 sale on sneakers? Maybe I should just be happy that anyone's talking about HIV, especially when so many people think of the AIDS crisis as a historical event and not as the ongoing public health emergency that it is. A professor in my graduate program once told me that an object or an event needs time before it becomes a topic of study, more precisely 30 years of historical distance. I turned 30 this year. Do I have enough distance from my own past to reflect on it as an object of historical inquiry? And do we need another 30 years before we can talk about the possible impacts of a cure in a society believing itself to be post-crisis? Bullshit, I'd say. We don't have that kind of time, not when people are still sick. We've got 5 years, what a surprise. I've never lived in a time without HIV and AIDS. It's always been a part of my lexicon, normalized to the point that I can write about it with relative ease, but during the early years of the crisis and how they talk about it. Are they able to share their experiences, or is it still too painful? Language fails us when we need it most, but then again, words are just too fucking limited to express our deepest grief, the kind that seeps into our bones and into our core. I think it's a pain cry, and I said pain cry, then language is the virus. The scientists who commented on the findings suggest that they have 2 primary objectives at this juncture: to replicate the results of these initially successful procedures and to develop an effective treatment that can be more widely administered before the virus adapts and evolves. The hyper-resilient cells in the transplanted bone marrow also have mutated to block infection through CCR5, a protein resting on immune cells that, in its unmutated form, allows HIV to permeate through the membrane and infect its host. The designation CCR5 is chillingly clinical, reducing language to alphanumerical identification. I feel anxious, maybe even a little paranoid. I think to myself that our greatest fears are the ones that we cannot name, let alone comprehend, the unknowable. I can almost hear David Bowie's sinister croon from Station to Station, TVC-15, CCR5, a moniker all too ready for a dystopian soundtrack. Oh, so demonic, oh my TVC-15, transition, transmission. Mutations are just a means of survival. They force the cellular body to weaponize, to become a protective force, or by equal turn, an agent of harm. Procedures like bone marrow transplants remind us that our bodies are both very simple and impossibly complex. It's a trip that seems all too easy. If your bodily tissue stops functioning, just swap out 6 cells for healthy ones. Choose well-being over disease, a few more years over a matter of months. And then the inevitable realities kick back in, that bodies exhaust themselves, quietly failing in ways that we can't perceive or understand. Yeats must have been in on it when he wrote that things fall apart that the center cannot hold, a foreboding dissolution distilled into an unsettled line of verse. I'm struggling to keep together, to find an even-keeled headspace, to think about epidemic and mortality. And then I think of the people who don't have the option to think about disease as an abstract concept, but have to live it and live through it every day. I knock myself back in place as I continue to wake up. The scientists interviewed by the Times suggest that rearming the body with immune cells modified to resist HIV might well succeed as a practical treatment. It's a quiet but salient metaphor, an image of immune cells as both armor and ammunition, stealing healthy tissue from harm while attacking invasive bodies. But there's also an inherent discomfort in recognizing how readily we're able to imagine the human body and its functions through the language of war. I think about the implications of rearming and a suggestion of a phantom or lost limb that can only be restored by turning the body into a weapon, by replacing it with an appendage that's ready to fight. Language reveals how readily we accept systems of power by adopting and normalizing vernaculars. The military-industrial complex is giving us a complex, and it's making us sicker by the day. Where was that protection that I needed? Air can hurt you too. I head to the kitchen to make breakfast, bring my laptop to the table. As I scroll up to reread the article, I'm startled anew by the header image, which depicts a red and orange globule surrounded by smaller emerald green circles scattered around the perimeter like confetti or microgreens around an egg yolk. Arrestingly lovely, its sense of form and color immediately appeal to the visual language of formal abstraction. The caption notes that the rendering depicts a colored transmission electron micrograph of the HIV virus in green attaching to a white blood cell in orange. My brain feels deceived. I thought white blood cells would be whites, and struggles with the misrecognition. Disease apparently can take on the guise of beauty. But is the virus itself beautiful, or just how the image has been rendered? I remember a recent conversation with a data scientist who explained that specific colors are often applied to visual renderings to both distinguish unique elements in the composition and to make them more easily legible to viewers. We dress up hard truths, we sugarcoat them so we can soften the blow when we break the difficult news. I feel angry with the scientists who generated the image for letting their aesthetic sensibilities get the better of them. But the color choices have a purpose, to visually distinguish the virus from healthy cells. I soon realized that I'm angry with myself for finding the image beautiful, for failing to correlate the micrograph with the weight of the story below. My mind flashes to a street sign by the artist Anthony Vicenza that reads, "Pretty pictures won't solve anything, no shit," I think to myself. I open the refrigerator and reach for an egg and some salad greens for breakfast. As I crack the egg, I stare into the yolk and look back at my screen and the image of the orange-tinted cell under attack. It's an uncanny visual parallel. I lose my appetite. The light begins to bleed, begins to breathe, begins to speak. March 9th, 2019. I walk into printed matter in New York. The cold air outside prevents my mind from spinning thoughts of viruses and impact events. It's one of the few benefits of freezing temperatures. The physical discomfort shocks you back into your body. I head over to a table of recent releases from small presses and immediately see 3 volumes from Pilot Press from the UK, which are identified as queer anthologies on loneliness, rage, and joy. Sickness, I'm told, will be published later in the spring. 3 choices, each with a compelling argument. I tell myself that I can get one, as if this were some test of moral fortitude. It's funny how these decisions, however arbitrary, can feel impactful in the moments. Like nearly everyone I know, rage has become a default disposition, especially as our political and economic environments become even more untenable. But it's apathy that gets to me, the all too willing indifference to the vulnerability of others. It's also the history reportage on HIV and AIDS. Take another look at Lawrence K. Altman's article, Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals, which ran on page 820 of the New York Times on July 3rd, 1982. Altman's report is widely considered the first report on the virus, then referred to as GRID in a major news source. The article's oh-so queer-phobic bullshit, with remarks from a physician that there was no apparent danger to non-homosexuals from contagion, and that the best evidence against contagion is that no cases have been reported to date outside the homosexual community or in women. When I think of this, I try to calm down and remember how misinformation circulated in the early years of the epidemic. But the article was always meant to be a throwaway, banished to the back of the paper where it could quietly run and be forgotten. Queer people didn't matter, not to the Times nor to its readers. And when Altman's article went to print, it ran sidebar to a full-page reproduction of sheet music for the Star-Spangled Banner, ready to clip out for celebrations the next day. The banner headline implores readers to sing out on the 4th, and the juxtaposition feels impossibly cruel. A public health crisis deafened by the promise of fireworks and celebration and song. My anger surges as I flip through the books on the table. I take a look at the next title, Loneliness, and wonder if anger and loneliness aren't so far off from one another. The cautious hope of an HIV cure that might not actually be a cure certainly made me feel helpless in a way I hadn't anticipated. That's the bite of hope, isn't it? Despondency can sneak up on you if you don't assume it blindly, and it's hard to feel joy when I think about my queer ancestors and all the people who held on to that hope, that they would be part of something bigger, something greater, who remained positive and fought back and still never made it. Joy feels increasingly precarious and perhaps even responsible when faced with our deeply troubled and fucked up world. And there are many days when it's just too damn hard and painful to muster it up. But when I remember those queer ancestors, and the people who came before me, I also think about how they shape my relationship to art and to activism. I mean, how I think about how they shape my sense of self. And without them, I wouldn't have the tools to figure out who I am. And that feels something to be pretty fucking joyful about. And it's my responsibility, and yours, to honor those we've lost by feeling joy, and by feeling rage, and by feeling loneliness. It's our responsibility to carve out livable lives for ourselves. Denying our capacity to feel and the capacity of others to feel, that's the killer. And we certainly need hope. Without it, what's the point? Inside this door, I calm down and open the third anthology to find a poem by J.D. Scott that reads, "Let's maintain this brain where we see each other not as the world seeks to see us, making us into fool's gold, but as we see each other together in this now beaming inside all this inebriated joy. Let's keep seeing each other inside this inebriated joy. Repeat, fight, live. Jump out of the plane. There is no pilots. You are not alone." Lori Anderson.
Hello. Happy to be here. Thank you to Amy for inviting me, and Sid and Katie and the gallery. I'm feeling a lot of the correlations that Amy was speaking of between visual art and poetry, and in all this work that's present here today, and also in the work that was present here the last time I was here, which was an exhibition inspired by the work of Ani Albers. When was that?
In the summer. Yeah,
Okay.
last summer.
2 summers ago.
Was it 2 summers ago?
Yeah, that's
Oh
what
my
I mean. I
goodness.
have no sense of
2021.
time anymore.
Pandemic time.
I have to ask. Yeah, it feels like just last week. And it was, similarly, a group of work. And so, yeah, I feel that correlation. Collage is part of it. But also just, I feel like the impactfulness of seeing. And that's where I'd like to start. I have a few brief things I'd like to share today. So this is a book called Fantastic Caryatids. It's a collaboration between Ann Waldman and myself that started out by our going around just to galleries in New York City and then writing a poem that we would, not really on the spot, but I think later we would send each other things and edit it together. And it's photographs too, some similar to what Amy was talking about. So photographs that I took around just things that were interesting to me. And then we decided to add an actual conversation about all these topics. So I'd like to read one response by Ann Waldman to a question that I asked her. I'll find it. Here it is. So I was talking about seeing, because that was a lot of what we were talking about, was, seeing art, seeing things on the street. But then I asked her, I said, what about this idea of seeing we've been talking about? We've been doing a lot of visual seeing, but seeing, of course, is metaphorical too. How is poetry a vehicle for seeing? And this is Anne's answer to that question. Poetry penetrates your being in a way that heightens sense perceptions. You see more. You can see beyond. You feel inner eye and ear change in relationship to language and to consciousness. I notice sometimes, reading poetry and then going out, that other things, unlike poetry, are jarring, ragged, abrupt, because it's a different language on the street. The ordinary traffic of language. Very simple, communicative. Pass me the salt. I need a ticket. We inherit that relative quotidian demand, but you have to bring that into your magic spells and weave. Anselm Hollow's line, always treat language as a dangerous toy, comes to mind. Or Alice Notley's, don't let the tyrant fool you. And suddenly you are with a woman with a red sash and an owl on a shamanic voyage. Intense, lucid dreaming and certain vectors of seeing operate, where you have myriad consciousness, the ear-eye attuned to very small moves, more intricate moves within individual words. A message that is fractured and interrupted, coming in and out of focus, engenders a different way of thinking and seeing. Fractals, parts of objects, of beings, of landscape. Obviously, the attraction to reading and the necessity of semantic value persists, whether you deconstruct it or not. Words as signs and signals are always potent and complicated. Maybe they are a killer virus, as Burroughs indicates. How it sets up images relates to visual art, and that is interesting. Walking around with you today, we're reading these paintings, we're reading objects, in this case, up against human flesh and bodies. We're reading architecture, and we have an association with being human ourselves, when something's sleepy or languid or droopy or plastic or precise. When something is cutting, like Williams's flower, the edges of the flower cutting into space. The imagery that goes with poetry also has that ability to make these pictures in our minds. I don't know that visual artists are seeing it so differently. They're also caught up in the actual elements of making the work. So that's some further thoughts into visual art and poetry. Poetry as seeing. I taught a course with that title a couple of times, and it's interesting. I feel like we all don't see much anymore because we're all on our screens, even as much as we try to avoid it. But I was surprised to find that was true of visual artists. I taught a class of visual artists, and they're just as guilty of that as we non-visual artists. So we're all in the same boat, but we can make an effort. And so poetry, interestingly, is one vehicle, I feel like, to be able to see. Now I'm getting back to the more basic sense of seeing, like just seeing something. So whether it's William Carlos Williams as a model of I'm just going to describe something visually, to me that can be very important and generative. So keeping on that line, that nice line that's not a defined line and not a demarcation line, but a kind of a joining point among visual art and poetry. I'd like to invoke someone whom I think a lot of you knew better than I did, but I got to know her in recent years, Etel Adnan. Mm-hmm. And this is a poem dedicated to her from my book, Broadway for Paul. Young in the Hamptons, to Etel Adnan. I suddenly see a magenta light projecting from a building amid steam. Those are the stakes. You have to pull them up and move ahead. Listening to the opera on the radio Saturday night, trying to figure out the composer. Classical, but not Mozart. There's nothing on. But the lights outside on new looming buildings and squat older ones tell a different story. One of endless occupation of space. In the opera, Iphigénie en Tauride, already the sky is getting dark. Buildings to the west still reflect light. Nearby brick chimneys darkening. The day was so bright, so survived by one who was sick, who lay on the sofa immobile, but then got up to have chicken soup and tea and began to feel a little better. A new small metal chimney top. Baker's cat top spins listlessly to the left. I love the winter as much as the summer. The lights that proceed up the building under construction glimmer slightly, as if modestly wishing to excuse themselves. A helicopter stands stark still in the sky, blinking red and white lights. Now it swivels like an insect, now moves slowly to its right. The sky a slate color, broad and encompassing, flat, yet wholly permitting different states of mind in the rattle of radiator pipes and yellowish lights on in the apartment buildings across the way, and even further, out where other lives are gathering, far from this dark wall in front. And now I'd like to shift gears a little bit, but it's in a way not a complete shift, because I think part of what we're talking about is translation, moving from the visual to the written, but also translating something that one sees into some other form, whether it's a piece of art or a poem or just talking to somebody, telling them about it. I feel like those are all equivalent in a sense. And this is, translation, I think, is an important practice to a lot of writers, and it is to me. So I've translated the poems of Sextus Propertius, who was a Roman under in the age of Augustus, and he wrote these kind of obsessive love poems that have gone in and out of favor throughout the years. Ezra Pound was a fan, but other people didn't regard them that highly. But this is an interesting bit in his first book, which was written when he was probably in his 20s. There are two poems that he writes to a friend of his or somebody he knows who is an epic poet, who's writing a poem about the founding of Thebes, and it's all about warfare and heroism and manly values. And so in the first poem, Propertius is writing to him, and he's saying, you're doing all this and you're competing with Homer, but if you ever fall in love, all of that's going to be useless to you, and you're going to need love poetry, and you won't call me so insignificant, and you'll see the value in what I do, and so that that he sort of warned him in that poem. But I'm going to read the follow-up poem, so we're going to see what happens to this fellow Ponticus. But I'm going to just read you a couple of notes, because Propertius tends to litter his poems with these arcane references, which I feel like even his original audience didn't know everything he was referring to. He's kind of like, I think that was part of his, swish and his bravura was like, just going to do this. So he uses the phrase Chaonian doves, which refers to an oracle of Zeus, which was called Chaonian Zeus, and its priestesses were called doves. So the Chaonian doves are these priestesses of this oracle. The Amphionian lyre was about the poet Amphion, who had a lyre, and his music was so godly and powerful that it made the stones rise up from the ground and form the walls of Thebes. He refers to a poet called Mimnermus, who was kind of like himself, a poet who wrote in a form that was not epic. It was a quieter form, kind of an elegiac form, although this poet was from Greece. And this one, I just want to read this note because it's so crazy. Hell's wheel, which I think we're familiar with being on the wheel as a punishment, it's Catherine's wheel. But this is in Greek mythology and Roman mythology. Hell's wheel. Ixion, king of the Lapiths, was given Dia, a woman named Dia, in marriage for a certain sum payable to her father. Ixion, having got Dia, refused to pay. Her father harassed Ixion, who killed him. Brought in judgment before Zeus, Ixion pleaded so well, he convinced Zeus of his innocence, until Zeus noticed him in the corner making love to his wife, Hera, and therefore bound him to a revolving wheel of fire in Tartarus. He's a kind of a smooth character, right? So this is Propertius talking to his friend Ponticus, the epic poet. I told you how love would be, and you laughed. From now on, your words will not come free. Look how you lie, a suppliant, as you submit to her terms. An average girl, once bought, now rules over you. Chaonian doves can't beat me at love predictions. I know which youths each girl will dominate. Suffering and tears have earned me my expertise. If only I could be called ignorant of love's touch. What good is it now in your misery to speak your solemn poem, to mourn the walls of the Amphionian lyre? Myrmis's poetry is worth more in love than Homer's. Mild love seeks soft songs. Please, go bury those sad books and sing anything the average girl wants to hear. What if this abundance were not so easily yours? Insane now, in the middle of the river, you ask for water. And you're not even pale yet. You haven't really felt the fire. This is but the first spark of the suffering to come. Then, you'd rather face Armenian tigers and know the bondage of hell's wheel than to feel so often the boy's bow in your marrow and be powerless to deny your angry girl a single thing. Love doesn't give his wings so easily that he does not repress with the other hand. Don't think that winning her was enough. She cuts even sharper, Ponticus, if she is yours, as your eyes are not allowed to wander freely, nor does love let you spend the night with someone else. He remains invisible until his hand strikes you to the bone. Whoever you are, fly from the constant flirtations. Flint and oak would yield to them, not to mention you, who are just light spirit. So, for the love of God, admit your mistake as soon as possible. To say where you lost in love often eases it. And finish up with a few poems from this book called Previous Glances, An Intense Togetherness. And the first couple, it's in a way going back to the Black Mountain theme that Ani Albers was important in. But this is going to be kind of referencing two other Black Mountain people, Charles Olson and Robert Creeley. It's called Raleigh, Raleigh, North Carolina. I was down there doing some research on Black Mountain College, and I started to feel like I was seeing the ghost of Charles Olson, or feeling him. So it's dedicated to C.O., and the second poem is dedicated to Bob, whom I knew personally. Raleigh to C.O., the South. Did you mention the South? Allison's skirt. Okay, I see you, big guy. And that's a smile, too. Moving, soft, and also nuts, those eyes. Through night to water. Got pulled, but okay. The blankets, smile to eat. To ear, wet heat on, around trees, all. My love's laugh, step into only language, enormous magnolias. Raleigh night to Bob, 1. Back to England, to fit as misfit, scraps in trash, mini disco ball, music's accessible rush. 2. Could never work in the long run. Tonight, so perfect. The queer reality of it. Gentleness. And we'll read one more piece. This one it's called Variations for Sarah, and it's for Sarah Sarhandi, who's a friend, British composer and collaborator. We collaborated on an opera based on the poem So Sex is Precocious. So these are variations for Sarah. They're numbered, but I won't read the numbers, but they're 17 kind of one-liners. Variations for Sarah. Late to bed, early to rise. Is there anything I can do? What is the situation? We are all in this together. What will the future bring? The night can bring uncertainty, but the day is full of things to do. Can you find the right answer? What if there is no right answer? What if there is only a choice between difficulties? There will be an answer, and it will be a way to live. And it will be by devoting oneself to others that can occupy a day and a line of days, a succession, and finally, that will become a life. Other people occupy their lives differently. How do they occupy themselves? There are philosophies and books that concern themselves with the right way to act. It is not so difficult to figure out, but it is difficult to put into practice because there are so many temptations, inducements to laziness and procrastination. One must assume responsibility for one's decisions and one's activities. I can never remember what exactly it is I want. This leads to endless problems, self-recriminations. But if I could remember, keep it clear, then I could have one path to be on.
If people who are standing want to have seats, it's a good time. We have one more reader, Hengst. There's no glass.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for asking me. I'm going to be reading from 2 journal entries. The first one is from the journals of Tammy Welch, a writer that Larry Ritter turned me on 2 years ago, and I always go back to. The second one's from Bruce Chapman, The Song Lines. The first one's 11th February, 8:30 p.m., 1944. This evening I bicycled to Penshurst. I climbed up the hill easily because I was with a man who worked at the railway and he talked all the time about the last war. At the top, he said goodbye and I went on down the hill past the soldier and the old neurotic home, Swaylands, which is now a military hospital. 2 idle, loosely hanging soldiers stood at the lodge, waiting for something to be brought to them. They looked at me lazily and curiously as I sped past. The light was just fading, and I thought how picturesque, in the old sense of the word, Penshurst was. Unused gateways, cottages clinging together, a little stone bridge, the charming little stone bow-fronted house near it, and the Victorian attempts at romantic Elizabethan. I went on past Leicester Square and the Leicester Arms, on a farm. I went past Leicester Square, the Leicester Arms, and as I passed the pub, I thought of Eric, who lived here near on a farm when he was 21. He told me that once he won a race in the village sports, and Lord Delisle gave him a money order for 10 shillings, which he spent on cigarettes. I can imagine him running in Penshurst Park with the ancient trees around him and the people in white and colors. I can see it, the heat of the day, and Eric, younger, chubbier, as he puts it, with his dark hair stuck on his forehead with sweat, and the Adam's apple swelling up and down in his throat. I can imagine him afterwards with the village youths and girls, and I longed so much to have been there too, so that afterwards we could have had a lovely night talking and drinking and singing. Nothing can make up for the fact that my very early youth was so clouded with illness and unhappiness. I feel cheated, as if I never had that fiercely thrilling time when the fears of childhood have left one and no other thing has swamped one. The cheek is plump and smooth, the eye and the teeth are bright, and one feels that one could lie down and die if these first essentials were ever taken away. When I passed the great house, it was nothing but a gray and faded silhouette, peaked roofs of chapel and great hall, battlements of the front restored part. Across the ha-ha, the grass was smooth from the mouths of the innumerable sheep or deer. I stared and stared at it, wondering what I would do if I lived in the middle of that huge pile, all alone. At the top of the hill, I asked a soldier on sentry duty the way to Lee. I remember now that I passed in the village street near the Leicester Arms, a cook all in white with a tall hat. It is curious to see their traditional clothing still, alone in the village street at dusk, like a ghost. When I passed the fleur-de-lis at Lee, again I thought of Eric, for he told me that he used often to get tight there. Curious to think that all this time while Eric worked on the farm, hated it, was utterly lonely, got tight as often as possible just for something to do. I was only a few miles away in Tonbridge, walking the streets in my restlessness, trying to make myself iller and iller by any foolishness, wanting to die. And we never met, and all the years in between, 7, 8, we knew nothing of each other. It all melted away and were wasted. The next one is 24th March, 4:25 p.m., 1946. Last day, alone again, and I have been in the woods saying goodbye. I thought under a tree root I had found an amazing stump, gentian blue through and through, of a toadstool. For a moment it was a treasure to me, and I thought I too a segment of the violet blue cap as well. But when I went up to it and bent down, it was the spout and end part of the lid of an old blue enamel teapot, thrusting through clogged layers of dead leaves. There were the indented gums of gaping old shoes, too, and primroses and iris shoots coming out of black slime ponds. Gnats were already dancing round and round in a mad swirl. I went to the lately deserted mid-Victorian cottage, very taking in its way. One of the walls is about to fall out, so it is deserted. This afternoon, the back door, which has always been locked, was open. There was a white dog snuffling about, but it seemed unattended by its human being, so I slipped through the door into the wash-house scullery with its narrow larder. Boys had broken some of the pretty, fanciful white latticed pine, but the walls seemed good. The front kitchen living room had a minute bow, latticed again and with its own tiny tiled roof outside. If one could only have made the front door of glass, there would be all the light needed. The stairs were in a box, and I came to the narrowest landing I had ever seen, and off it were 3 bedrooms, one the size of a large closet, the back one the biggest, and the front one with a doll's Victorian grate, beautifully designed, slight, yet baroque and rich. I imagined it with a handful of juicy apple twigs in it, and jewel-like, jet-like fragments of coal. A weight of depression clapped down on me as I imagined living there, working to make it beautiful. Powerful breaths of sadness puffed at me. I thought of the black miasma swamps at the bottom of the clay pits so near. I thought of the swarm of mosquitoes that buzzed upwards in the summer air. I left the house thinking all my life near here of how I should never live here again. And this is from Bruce Chapman. It's from his journal section of his book. Sydney Harbor. On the ferry back from Manly, a little old lady heard me talking. "You're English, aren't you?" she said in an English North Country accent. "I can tell you're English." "I am." "So am I." She was wearing thick steel-framed spectacles and a nice felt hat with a wisp of blue net above the brim. "Are you visiting Sydney?" I asked her. "Lord love, no," she said. "I've been here since 1946. I came out to live with my son, but a very strange thing happened. By the time the ship got here, he died. Imagine. I'd given up my home in Doncaster, so I thought I might as well stay. So I asked my second son to come out and live with me. So he came out, emigrated, and you know what? No. He died. He had a heart attack and died." "That's terrible," I said. "I had a third son," she went on. "He was my favorite, but he died in the war. Dunkirk, you know, he was very brave. I had a letter from his officer. Very brave he was. He was on the deck, covered in blazing oil, and he threw himself into the sea. Ooh, he was a sheet of living flame. But that is terrible. But it's a lovely day," she smiled. "Isn't it a lovely day?" It was a bright sunny day with high white clouds and a breeze coming off in the ocean. Some yachts were beating out toward the heads, and other yachts were running under spinnaker. The old ferry ran before the Whitecaps towards the Opera House and the bridge. "And it's so lovely out at Manly," she said. "I loved to go out to Manly with my son. Before he died. But I haven't been for 20 years. "But it's so near," I said. "But I haven't been out of the house for 16. I was blind, love. My eyes covered with cataracts and I couldn't see a thing. The eye surgeon said it was hopeless. So I sat there. Think of it, 16 years in the dark. Then along comes this nice social worker the other week and says, 'We better get those cataracts looked at.' And look at me now." I looked through the spectacles at a pair of twinkling, that is the word for them, twinkling blue eyes. "They took me to the hospital," she said, "and they cut out the cataracts. And isn't it lovely? I can see." "Yes," I said, "it's wonderful." "It's my first time out alone," she confided. "I didn't tell a soul. I said to myself at breakfast, 'It's a lovely day. I'll take the bus to Circular Quay and go over on the ferry to Manly, just like we did in the old days.' I had a fish lunch. Oh, it was lovely." She hunched her shoulders mischievously and giggled. "How old would you say I was?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Let me look at you." "I'd say you were 80. "No, no, no," she laughed. "I'm 93, and I can see."
Thank you all for coming. Help yourself. Thank you for bringing one over to me. That was so lovely. I really enjoyed it. So help yourself. Also, check out Amy's. I haven't had a chance to over and check out Amy's piece.
And I want to thank Gillian.
Yes.
Gillian is my first and closest cousin, and she's a butcher maker and cocktail maker, and she invented this violet cocktail. And just thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, Amy.